This happened shortly before weed was legalized in Germany. In Berlin, regulations were already fairly relaxed, and as long as you didn't explicitly bother anyone, you usually wouldn't get arrested for smoking in public. I've been smoking daily for years. I know it's not great, but that's besides the point, so I can function pretty well while stoned. However, I almost never smoked in public, partly to avoid trouble, but mostly because I prefer the comfort of my own home. One late night around 3 a.m., I was chilling online with friends ready to call it a day. I wanted to unwind with a joint and one of my favorite shows, but I had no snacks left. Determined to end the night properly, I decided to head to a nearby Späti, a small convenience store similar to a 7-Eleven. At that hour, only the sketchiest ones were still open, often operating illegally. I grabbed my coat and keys but hesitated before leaving. Why not make this cold walk a little bit more enjoyable, I thought, rolling a small joint. I lit it as I stepped outside, braving the freezing breeze. The area I live in is pretty rough, mostly foreign residents, many from Arabic countries. Poor integration has led to high crime and violence, but I was in good spirits as I strolled through the flickering neon sign of the Späti. Just one more intersection to cross. A group of men stood at the corner. They looked Middle Eastern, a bit older than me, and watched as I walked by. It felt normal, nothing unusual, and I crossed the street already a little high without giving them much thought. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Routine ID check. Please show me your identification." My heart sank. Of course this had to happen the one time I smoke in public, I thought, turning to face the police. But they weren't police. It was the group from the intersection, now slowly approaching me. "Routine ID check. Please show me your ID. We're undercover cops," one of them said with a very smug grin. I froze. It was clear they weren't cops. None of them showed identification, and their demeanor gave them away. "You know smoking weed is illegal, don't you?" The man continued, his pupils enormous, and it was obvious that they had no authority whatsoever. And they began circling me. "Show us what's in your pockets," the leader demanded. So, it's a robbery, I thought. If I don't resist, maybe I'll only lose my phone and the few bills that I'd brought for snacks. Then, a wave of dread hit me. My weekly tips, about 300 in cash, were also in my pocket. I'd forgotten to deposit it earlier, and losing that money would wreck my budget for the month. What now? As I slowly reached into my pocket, the leader pressed me. "What's taking so long?" I pulled out an old pack of gum and some broken headphones, hoping to satisfy them. "Where's your wallet? I need your ID," he insisted. Now, still fumbling, too stubborn and stupid to hand over my tips, I inadvertently noticed something that shocked me. The glint of a Glock tucked in his belt. Knives and metal rods are typical weapons around here, but a gun? That was insane, even by local standards. German gun laws are incredibly strict, and my adrenaline spiked. Slowly, I pulled out the €5 bill that I'd planned to use for snacks, trying to keep my expression neutral. "You got no wallet?" he growled, his face darkening. My brain screamed at me to do something, anything before this escalated further. Then, a desperate thought flashed through my mind. The Arabs in this area were known to fear Russians due to frequent clashes between the two groups, and maybe, just maybe, I could use this to my advantage. In a very heavy Russian accent, I stammered, "My friends have my wallet. They're coming soon. We'll meet here." And to my surprise, their poor English comprehension worked in my favor. They exchanged glances, muttered in German, and decided to wait, and I forced myself to look confused, keeping up the bluff. It worked, though. Their effort to figure me out seemed too much trouble, and the leader finally pointed at the €5 bill. "All right, then. You get us something to drink." Reluctantly, I followed them into the Späti. They grabbed a 6-pack of Coke, and I paid. My heart was pounding, and I was sure that this wasn't over. That they'd search me or retaliate when my non-existent friends didn't show up. But then, just like that, they left. No violence, No further questions. Nothing. I stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Now looking back, I can't believe I bluffed my way out of such a dangerous situation. That could have been my last day on Earth, all for 300 euros. I've learned my lesson, and these days I avoid walking around late at night when the streets are empty.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. There are pretty disturbing posts and stories you come across while going through 4chan that is too much to handle for those who are weak-hearted. But those of you who don't know about this, 4chan is an anonymous website where one can post anything without any filter. This was back in 2011, around the time when I first got to know about the website. I was still in high school and a pretty naive kid who used to follow what other most popular kids used to do. The reason was that I was always in a world of my own, watching movies like a high school nerd suddenly getting popular and started hanging out with the cool kids, eventually ending up with the most gorgeous girl in the entire movie. What I didn't know at the time was that sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. Looking at how kids in my school were always on their phones doing nothing, I started doing the same. It was the time when I started going through 4chan just to keep myself busy. But as time passed, I somehow started to become addicted to the website, since it always had something new and interesting. I never actually posted anything or talked with anyone. I was more of an observer or whatever entrancing things were going on the forum. As I was more and more absorbed in it, I started losing interest in the popular kids and focused more on what was keeping me constantly interested. One day when I was going through the website, I saw someone post a picture of a red painted chair with a star sign over it. I don't know why, but for some reason the necklace seemed strangely familiar, which was weird. The chain seemed freshly painted since it was still wet and was smudged all over the table it was put on. Upon looking at the picture, anyone could say that the person who had uploaded the picture is trying to boast his or her painting skills, which was pretty sloppy. It didn't seem like something to look at, so I shrugged it off. And since the class was about to start soon, I put my phone in my locker after turning it off. In the middle of the lecture, I noticed the fifth seat of the second row was empty. It looked like Annie was absent. She was the most beautiful girl in the entire school, and obviously the girl I had a crush on, since she was going to become mine someday. I was pretty disappointed that she was absent, as sneaking glances during the lectures had become my favorite hobby. She was always accompanied by her best friend Elizabeth, who was the second most beautiful girl, probably playing the role of the second female lead in our story. The girl who always fell in love with the main lead, but due to my heart belonging to Annie, she would have to be disappointed in the end. The lecture ended when I was lost in my imagination, and since I wasn't able to pay attention to it, I was going to have to go to the library to give an extra hour to cover up the lesson. The remaining lectures went by just as normally as they always have been, and once I was done with the class, I went straight to the library. Looking at the number of students in our school, it was quite big. It didn't lack any facilities either. It had a cafeteria that served good food, multiple playgrounds, and music rooms. But what I loved the most were the two libraries. Most of the students used to go to the big library in the main building, while the second library, which was smaller in comparison, and being in the east building, was not so popular despite being peaceful. It was because the east building was a bit far, and only a few classes used to be held there in rare cases. Rumors among students said that there were ghosts in that building, but they were all false since I always used to go to that library and study till late. Since the library was on the third floor and the elevator not working as usual, I started walking up the stairs when I heard faint whispers coming from the last classroom in the left corridor. I was instantly reminded of the ghost rumors, but I shook it off because I knew very well that there was no such thing as ghosts. The door of the room was partially open, so peeked through and saw two of our students standing there. I could only see their backs, so I couldn't figure out who they were. As my eyes scanned the area, they landed on Annie's lifeless body. I couldn't stop the sudden scream from leaving my throat, causing the two students to turn immediately. For some reason, my legs gave up. I knew in my mind that I had to run and tell someone, but the cowardliness in my cells was at its peak. My body froze, my eyes stuck on Annie's slit throat. I was too petrified to be able to do anything. I somehow broke free of it, only to find that Elizabeth and Andrew weren't there anymore. They killed Annie. I had to do something. I had to tell the principal about it. And as I was turning about thinking this, I saw Andrew standing behind me with an unsettling smile forming across his lips. I was thrown around in one blow, causing my back to hit the wall and making a cracking sound along the way. He then took out his belt and started striking me, aiming mainly at my neck area. I started crawling away from him. He grabbed my left foot and started dragging me inside the classroom Annie was in. These bastards knew very well that no matter how much I screamed, it was almost impossible for my voice to reach someone. And even if they did hear a faint sound coming from there, they would probably assume it was a ghost. He broke my arms and my left ankle, causing me an immense amount of pain. Before I could let out a scream, he stood on my throat and started strangling me with his foot. As I was passing out from the lack of oxygen and pain, I could see a silver star chain necklace peeking out from his shirt. Ah, I remember now. It was Annie who used to wear it. No wonder it looked familiar. These were the last thoughts that came across my mind before everything went dark. When I woke up, it was already dark. I painfully managed to turn my face around only to find Annie's body missing. Guess they might have taken it. They must have thought I was dead, that's why they left me here. Hiding 2 dead bodies on the same day must have been too much for them, so they cleared the one that had the possibility of rotting. Everything was broken in my body, so getting up was extremely painful. I don't know how I managed to gather so much courage, but I still managed to do it, and dragging myself out of the school to the hospital that was a few blocks away from there. Watching me walk into the hospital building in such a condition, the nurse preset there rushes to my side and took me to the emergency room. When the doctor asked me who did it, I opened my mouth to tell him. I realized I was unable to speak, since that monster stood on my throat and strangled me with full force. Don't worry, it'll take some time, but it will heal. Take some rest till now. I watched his back as he walked away after saying that. A clump of tears formed in my throat with the helplessness I was feeling. With every single hit he had given me, it was like I was forcibly shaken away from my dream to my senses. Reality is truly scarier than a movie.
I got my first job when I was 15. Back then, we barely made anything per hour. I honestly think I started at like $5 or something like that. I was working in customer service, which seemed like it would be relatively easy, but I knew instantly that I hated it. The customers were always rude and miserable to deal with most of the time. I did like getting a paycheck though, and it allowed me to get a cell phone and just have some toss-around cash when hanging out with my friends. This was in the early days of things like Craigslist and Facebook, just as MySpace was winding down. Trying to find a better way to make some cash, I started strolling Craigslist for opportunities where I didn't have to deal directly with customers. It was pretty slim pickings. I called for a few landscaping jobs but never heard back. I stumbled across an ad looking for someone who could help with a summer cleanup of a few properties that were purchased adjacent to my neighborhood. The ad was pretty vague, I guess, and didn't mention much of that work actually needing to be done. I sent a response, and the next morning I got a call asking if I could show up to work. I was ecstatic. I figured if this worked out, I could kiss customer service goodbye, at least for the summer. I arrived at a property that was a little overgrown and a little shady from all the trees. I walked to a door that I assumed was a front door and was eventually greeted by this guy who introduced himself as Chip, and he had a smile almost like the Grinch, crooked yellow teeth and absolutely rancid breath. It was honestly one of the worst things I'd ever smelled, and I can still see a smile in my mind to this day. Anyways, this guy, Chip, started giving me a tour of the grounds and outlined some of the work that needed to be done. Some outdoor maintenance, tree trimming, chopping wood, but wanted me to start with some interior cleaning. I remember him taking me down a narrow flight of stairs into a finished basement. It was one room and completely square. The ceiling, floor, and walls were all wood. It was extremely dim and only gave off a small amount of yellow light. He gave me Pledge or Pine Sol, I don't remember which one, but I remember I wasn't familiar with the product as it had a very strong smell, and I thought after attempting to clean the walls that I was either staining them or ruining them with how I was attempting to clean. I had chores all my life, so I wasn't a novice to cleaning, but it definitely wasn't the spray stuff my mom had for us at home to clean the woodwork. After about what I think was 2 hours of cleaning, I took a quick seat to wipe the sweat from my head and take a sip of water. As I sat on the floor, I looked up the stairway that was barely illuminated and thought that I saw a dog or something laying at the top of the stairs. I wiped off my glasses and squinted up the stairs to see if I could make out what it was, but I just couldn't. I slowly got up and walked closer and saw that it was that Chip guy lying on the floor with a seemingly blank expression. As I got closer, I called out, "Is that you?" The blank stare turned into this very grotesque smile with those yellow crooked teeth, and he then whispered something like, "Oops, you caught me," followed by a quiet little laugh. I decided to do some of the outdoor work to pass the time and everything was going fine, but I kept getting a weird feeling from recalling that very strange moment. Yes, it was extremely weird and I probably should have just gotten out of there then, but I was a teenage kid at the time and I was a big kid, so I really didn't have too many worries and I just wanted to make some money. While I was outside, this Chip guy would be out there having a cigarette, staring at me. Or if he wasn't outside, every so often I would look at one of the windows and the blinds would suddenly be moving. I started to pretend like I was looking the other way but had my eyes fixated on the window. I could see his head trying to poke through the curtains looking at me and what I was doing. The day was about half over, give or take, if I recall correctly, and he asked if I could clean another basement similar to the one I had done before. I really didn't want to because I was freaked out from the last time, and because I felt like I was destroying this guy's damn wooden walls and floors with that pine saw. But I followed him to where I needed to go anyway, and as we got to the staircase, he stepped to the side and said something like, "There you go." But the basement was completely pitch black. I could barely see the stairs that I'd be walking down. I asked him, "Is there some light or something? I can't see." And he says, "Unfortunately not." And then went on to say that he had someone coming to install one, but there would be a light when I got down there. To this day, I still feel like he was breathing extremely heavily. I don't know if it was the hot breath hitting my neck and cheek or if he was really breathing like Darth Vader. I took a few steps towards the stairs and felt his breathing stop, like he was getting excited or nervous. I quickly grabbed my phone like I was getting a call and took a few steps back and headed towards the door to go outside. I sort of did a mock phone call as Chip stared at me with his hands on his hips. I looked at him and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I got a family emergency and I gotta go." Given it was my first day, he was really understanding. He was passive-aggressive and kind of short, but he probably had the right to be. I knew right at that moment that there was no chance in hell that I was going back, though. I went back to my customer service job where, even though I had to deal with people's crap, it was pretty easy work. And about halfway through the summer, I was eating dinner in the living room after getting out of work while my parents were watching the news, and I heard a report about a stalking incident which also led to an attempted breaking and entering. I hated the news and thought nothing of it, but then I heard the anchor mention a name, and it was that guy Chip's name. I immediately threw my plate down, asked them to turn it up, and sure enough, there he was. It was his complete full name, and I could not believe it. My parents asked why I was all of a sudden interested in the news, and I just gave them some stupid answers so I didn't make them worried. But to this day, I wonder what would have happened if I continued working with this Chip guy. He was clearly some type of predator with pending charges of stalking and B&E. But anyways, Now I work from home and don't have to deal with customers or any bosses that creep me out the way that guy did. I practice Taekwondo in a stadium in my city. It's a dangerous place, but I have been living all my life there and nothing has happened to me, so normally I forget about the robs and drugs and all of that. One day I was chatting with a friend in the entrance of the stadium and there was a guy shirtless and with a lot of muscles. He was just standing in front of a wall reading something, so none of us care about him. Some minutes later we say goodbye and leave to different places. I decide to walk to my house. I live about 30 to 40 minutes away. Because I had time and was a nice day, so while I was walking, I saw the same guy from before. He was walking in the street and fighting with the drivers. All I thought was that he was on some drugs and just kept walking. About 10 minutes later, he disappeared. Some minutes passed and nothing happened. I was just listening to music and walking. But 20 minutes later, or more or less, the guy passed me. I was kind of shocked because he appeared from nowhere, but he passed me, so I thought I was being way too paranoid. Then he stands in the same cross I was, and he watched me. I felt weird and texted my mom that I was close to home and asked her to open the door. It's important to describe my house for this. I live in a 3rd floor, but it's not a normal building. There are houses in the ground level, with 2nd floor backyard and everything. In between 2 houses, there is a stair that lets you in the 3rd floor. There are more houses over the ones on the ground level, and I live on the 3rd. So when I get to the stairs, the door was open and my dog was waiting for me. So I sit on the floor and pet her. Then my mom was like, "Be careful, there's someone behind you. Move so he can pass." I reply with an okay, stand up and went to the stairs without looking back. We started walking to my door. I went inside my house and looked back. And there he was. The shirtless guy was behind me all along, and he just was standing outside of my house. My mom closed the door and freaked out. She asked me if I knew him, if he had talked to me or something. I looked at her confused, still shocked. She started calling my dad, loud enough so the guy outside could hear it. My dad didn't hear her, but that was enough. The guy finally left. This happened some months ago, but it still freaks me out. He saw me, and he followed me, and now he knows where I live.
When I was about 11, I had this friend of a friend called Alex. He was 6 or 7 years older than us, but was a major nerd and had no friends that were his age. He would just constantly show up and would try to play with us. But honestly, I think my friend was just inviting him behind our backs and playing dumb to the rest of us. Needless to say though, I didn't really like him, and we would constantly argue and talk badly to each other, and never got physical besides the tackle that was a little too hard or just pushing each other around a bit. But after a while, for some reason, we both kinds of clicked with each other at one point and just stopped arguing. Well, we weren't going for each other's throats anymore anyway. But for the first time after a long time, I went to Alex's house, and his mom greeted us. She seemed very nice, but very passive and almost submissive. We sat down and talked to her for a bit. Then, we listened to some music and played on the Xbox. Then my dad telephoned me, so I left Alex's room to go to the kitchen, sit down, and take the call. Then suddenly, I heard the door open and saw the 662, 150-pound, not buff, but definitely not fat, bald man standing in the doorway. We made eye contact, and he looked at me with pure disgust that I was sitting at his kitchen table. Then he said, "Who the hell are you?" He had this look in his eyes that was almost predator-like, and I was his prey. I froze and didn't say a word. "Are you going to make me repeat myself, boy?" he growled. Alex had now come from his room and explained to his dad who I was. "Okay, well, get them the hell out of my house. You know better than to have friends here on weekdays while me and your mom go to work." I left in a hurry. And I'm not lying when I say that. I've never felt like that ever again. I can't really explain it. It wasn't really fair, but more of you're in danger vibe. Needless to say, I never went inside his house again. Fast forward a few months later, and Alex and I didn't really talk as much as we did. Alex had apparently gotten rejected by one of our mutual female friends, and he had then decided to break a 6-foot dollhouse over the girl's head. She had to go to the hospital and get 9 staples because of it, and there was a possibility she would lose her eye. Understandably, I heard that an adult male had hit my 15-year-old friend, so at that point, I just snapped and wanted to fight this guy because of it. But he was 18, and I was still loving. I called him 40 times and left a voicemail after voicemail, telling him I was going to kill him. I got arrested for this, even at age 11. I know it wasn't the smartest idea. And I told him to come to fight me, and screamed at him, telling him to hit me like he'd hit her. I'd actually walked to his house and were standing on the sidewalk, still calling out to him. He finally picked up, though. I just carried on screaming at him to come out and fight me. He was silent the whole time, but I could tell the phone was on speaker. Alex hung up the phone and I thought he was going to come out to fight me, but he never did. His dad came out instead and said the police were on their way, and if you step on this grass, I'll kill you. Stop calling my son, and we will have problems. I never told the cops that his dad had threatened me because honestly, I was freaking out about it. But now I had to explain to my family that I was getting arrested for threatening an 18-year-old while I was 11. I ended up with a few charges and was told that if I made any more contact, I'd end up in juvie. Again, this was because of a child threatening an adult. I was eventually forced into court, though, because my family wanted to drag me through the process as punishment. I think they only did this in an attempt to set me straight, like that TV show. But here's where the story takes a wild twist. 2 weeks before our court date, Alex's father was charged with a cold case of rape and murder. Alex's dad and his best friend had taken the friend's girlfriend out to a bar, drugged her repeatedly, then raped her. Then they beat her to death, to the point where she'd had multiple skull fractures, and even a part of her skull had been caved in. Then they took her to a bike trail and left her there to be found in the morning, and they did all this with no real concern of getting caught. This shocked the hell out of me. But what really scared me was his dad, and the times he'd said, "I'll kill you if you touch the grass, or we will have problems," etc. Normally I would have thought it was all just BS, but from him, I think it was never a threat. It was a promise. And it scares me to even think about the voicemails I'd left. And I honestly feel blessed that he hadn't come after my family, since he'd already shown to have little remorse or care for another human's life. When we got to court, Alex was staring at the man who just put his dad away for life. And there was little discussion about my charges. And Alex had never saved the voicemails anyway, so all charges of me were dropped. The next morning, Alex and his mom packed up and moved. I haven't seen them again since. Alex never got charged for assaulting the girl, because there was never a police report made. The girl had begged her parents to tell the doctors it was an accident, so the police had no idea about what had happened, until I told them why I threatened Alex in the first place.